The Speed of Sound by Thomas Dolby. Dan the driver opened the pneumatic door of the tour bus and I stumbled out, blinking in the Nevada sun. I had my arms full of electronic equipment. A Philips cassette machine, my Radio Shack portable computer, assorted cables, and those weird rubber acoustic cups that you push the phone receiver into to send and receive files. The pockets of my corduroy trousers were bulging with quarters. I'd made Dan pull off the highway at a run-down gas station a million miles from anywhere. This pissed him right off, but I needed to use the phone booth. He brought the bus to a stop in a cloud of its own dust. There was a beaten-up wooden shack with a porch and, I kid you not, an old guy in a rocker with a pipe. The sun was getting high now and the desert landscape was dull, featureless. Wrecked cars, the odd cactus. Somewhere off in the distance a glistening metropolis called Las Vegas rose out of the desert. It would be the middle of the morning by the time our 45-foot Silver Prevost tour bus rolled up the strip, still less than halfway to our destination, Salt Lake City. Dan the bus driver was from Texas. He had his little tin of amphetamines open on the dash and he was determined to make it all the way to Salt Lake by mid-afternoon. By law his limit was 10 straight hours of driving. But he wanted that overdrive bonus bad, so he'd waved away the idea of bringing a relief driver, and he still reckoned we would arrive at the venue just in time for sound check. Barring unscheduled stops. It was all because of Michael Jackson. He'd been on the guest list for our gig at the Greek Theater and afterwards he came backstage. I'd just finished my encores and I was cooling off in this big tent they'd set up as a green room. His entourage outnumbered my band and crew, which was awkward, but he beckoned me off into a corner and we stood facing the canvas wall and talked as the backstage freeloaders kept their distance, pretending not to look. I hadn't seen Michael since that rainy night at his house in Encino the previous February. His skin was translucent, like a lithe black vampire's. He was evolving. He spoke in a whisper, but I think he said he really liked the show. He knew the names of the individual songs, and was impressed that I had a Fairlight up there on stage, a fragile $90,000 computer music instrument. Was it better than his Synclavier, which cost twice as much? I gave him my views on both. I spouted bit rates and azimuth. This calmed me down. I was nervous because he was a showbiz genius, possessor of a God-given talent. He could have gotten up there and moonwalked circles around me any day of the week, singing his lungs out, and we both knew it. So I thought, I might as well blind him with science. We talked like that for 10 minutes before he told me he had to get back to the record plant, where he and his brothers were supposed to be recording a new album. It was chaos and they were way behind schedule. Each of the Jackson brothers had come in with his own demos, and everybody wanted a songwriting or production credit. But most of the songs, Michael admitted, were lame. His brothers wanted a piece of the action because his new solo album Thriller was selling millions, smashing all Billboard chart records. The smallest songwriting credit on a multi-platinum album was worth a fortune. He was worried the brothers' squabbling was going to escalate into full-scale war unless they could find some decent tunes pronto. I told him I had some great ideas I'd been working on in the back of the tour bus. You mean like Hyperactive? He asked. I love the groove on that. Yes, I said, enthusiastically. As it happens I have one just like Hyperactive, and another that's as good. Michael wanted to hear demos. I told him I could send him some later on that night or the next day. We're leaving town right after the party. Oh, but I can send them to you from my portable computer. He said, you've got a computer on your tour bus. Cool. I told him about my Radio Shack TRS-80, state of the art. It could even send files over a telephone line. I was thinking to myself, I'll stay up all night if I have to and write the damn songs. I skipped the after party, and by the time the bus was ready to roll out of LA at about 3 a.m. I was already hard at work on the demos. Dan the Texan bus driver walked the length of the bus to check everyone was on board before he hit the road. My backing band was still in a partying mood, and in the main lounge the booze and drugs were flowing. Someone had been chopping out lines of cocaine on the steel countertop. Lyndon, my 6'2" keyboard player, was still wearing the wedding frock and blonde wig that he favored for important gigs. Justin, a chain-smoking drummer with the airs of an English aristocrat, sat up front with Dan trading body jokes. Matthew and Leslie seemed to be deeply involved in a game of mental chess. Our diminutive Colombian guitarist Chucho, hair greased back, looking like a freedom fighter in his shades and army fatigues, was trying to sweet-talk a waitress from Orange County into staying on board for the overnight trip to the next gig. In the twilight of the rear lounge I was rocking out by myself, my face all lit up by LEDs. I had my battery-powered Roland TR-606 drum machine and TB-303 bassline fired up through some Akai headphones. I was punching in melodies on the miniature keys and jotting down random lyric ideas on a yellow pad. My #1 white linen suit and shirt, still damp with sweat from my onstage gyrations at the Greek, were hung up to dry next to me on a mirror. I was wriggling around on the bench seat as I fiddled with my shiny silver boxes, my sopping stage clothes dripping onto the naugahyde. Dan stuck his head through the curtain and scowled. Gayest damn bus I ever drove, he muttered. The sun came up somewhere around Barstow. The band had passed out in their coffin-like bunk beds. I was nearing completion of my 2 demos and getting ready to put down a rough vocal. I was pleased with the first, called Interference. It had an irresistible, elastic groove. Okay, so it was a touch reminiscent of Wanna Be Startin' Somethin' from Michael's Off the Wall album, but only a touch. He was bound to go for it. I felt he might like the second even better, though it was more restrained, more like a Prince power ballad. But I knew I'd better not mention that. Michael didn't approve of the purple one. Prince is too dirty, he had told me once. You can't sing songs about sleeping with your sister. So there I was, in the middle of the Nevada desert, head stuffed into a phone booth in the rising heat, trying to hook up my acoustic couplers. I'd called ahead to Michael's sound engineer, Bill Bottrell, who had another TRS-80 at the record plant ready to receive the digital files. But I'd tried 3 times and I was not getting a dial tone. My stash of quarters wouldn't last forever. I called Bill back and he said, Michael just walked in, I'm going to put him on. Michael came on the phone and I apologized for my tech problems and told him where I was. Oh, he said, why don't you just sing it down the phone, like in the old days? Crap. How did I land myself in this one? I took a deep breath, stared out across the desert, and started tapping out a beat, one-handed, on the metal chassis of the phone box. I cleared my throat and began to sing, in the time-honored fashion of he who has not yet written the lyrics. Interference, on my TV, freak-a-dum-dum, upside of me. Interference, da-dum-dum you, such a loser, you blew your cool, what does it mean? Interjected Michael. I tried to stamp out a trail of fire ants getting ready to crawl up the leg of my brown corduroy trousers. What does it mean? Yeah, you know, is it like running interference for a quarterback, or is it television interference, the little dots on your TV screen? Yes, more like that, I said, a little breathless. Like digital snow. No signal. Garbled. Radio waves and static. Electrostatic wavelengths. Silence on the other end. Eventually Michael said, what's the other song called? It's a kind of power ballad, I said. It's only a groove, really, but I'm calling it Iron Curtain. What's an Iron Curtain? Michael said. It sounded odd in his high falsetto. It's a quote from Winston Churchill, I said. I cupped my hand over my mouth and put on my best radio imitation. An iron curtain has descended over Europe. More silence. A tumbleweed rolled by. Look, I said, it'll be easier for me to send you the actual demos when I get to my hotel tonight. Hello. Hello, Michael. Hello. God damn it. I slammed down the receiver. You could hear the wind whistling in the telegraph poles. 30 yards down the road, Dan the driver gave a honk on his horn, and the pneumatic door swung open. I turned and stumbled back towards the bus, juggling wires and cables. Electrostatic wavelengths. What a fucking idiot. I just blew my one shot at writing songs with the new king of pop. And now I wanted to be many thousands of miles away from this infernal desert heat. I wanted my old life back. I wanted to be back in my bed-sitter in drab South London, in 1978, in the winter of discontent. In the editing suite next door was Steve Barron, who had just returned from Los Angeles, where he'd shot the video for Michael Jackson's Billie Jean. Michael was planning a secret visit to London to sit in on the edit of his clip. Siobhan told me to keep it to myself, because he didn't want to attract any paparazzi attention. He worked with Steve in the adjacent suite over the course of several days. One afternoon we met at the water cooler. Michael was wearing simple white jeans and a black leather jacket. I introduced myself and asked him if he was pleased with the progress on his video. I complimented him on the arrangement of Billie Jean, and I wasn't lying when I said it was one of the best singles I'd ever heard in my life. He told me he really liked She Blinded Me with Science, too. He said it was already getting some plays on urban radio and in dance clubs in the US, along with its B-side, One of Our Submarines. But he'd assumed I was a black guy. He showed me Steve Barron's work in progress on his video. Mostly it was successive takes of Michael strutting down an illuminated dance floor with his collar up. But he said that for the next singles from his album Thriller, he really wanted to try some narrative videos that had a real storyline. Which was why he was interested in She Blinded Me with Science. Michael gave me his number on a scrap of paper and said if I was ever in LA I should look him up. I wrote it in my Filofax, not really expecting I would ever get a chance to use it. I hadn't listened to the extended mix since the night we spliced it together 3 months earlier. So here I was on live TV, miming the wrong words, and missing some cues altogether. I was totally screwing it up. The adoring kids in the front row knew my record better than I did. Backstage after the taping, my capital entourage poured into the dressing room, predictably full of praise for my performance. They told me about the fun evening they had lined up for me. We thought we'd go for tacos at Carlos and Charlie's, then take in a couple of cool bands at the Whiskey A Go Go, enthused Dean Cameron. Then maybe some late night drinks in the VIP lounge at the Rainbow Room, added Bruce Wendell. What'd I say, TD? Actually, I promised I'd go and see some people tonight, I replied, not wishing to offend my new record label friends. Oh sure, we can drop you off wherever. Here, wanna use the phone? Somebody handed me a clunky wireless receiver. I rooted around in my shoulder bag and pulled out my leather-bound Filofax. Flipping through the pages, I was desperate to find any local number I could call. The humiliation of my lame TV appearance in front of all those screaming teenagers was sitting heavy on me, plus the mononucleosis and the jet lag were seriously kicking in. There was only one Los Angeles number in my book, and it was Michael Jackson's. So I dialed it, not telling my Capital buddies who I was calling. To my surprise, Michael himself answered. I said, "Hello, it's Thomas, we met at an editing suite in London." "You're really in LA? Where?" I had to ask. I'm in Burbank, apparently. Is that anywhere close to you?" "Yeah, it's close," said Michael. "I live in Encino. Want to come over?" "That would be great," I said, relieved at the thought of getting the entourage off my back. He gave me his address, a number in the high thousands on Havenhurst Avenue. The two limos headed out into the torrential downpour. In the back of ours, a crystal decanter of scotch was doing the rounds, and the Capital execs were in high spirits. Someone chopped out lines of cocaine on a mirrored side table. I was so spaced out already, the last thing I needed was chemical stimulation. I gave the limo driver the address. It was pitch black now, and rain was still pelting down. The driver squinted at the house numbers. "Doesn't Michael Jackson live on this street?" he said over his shoulder. "Yes, actually, that's where I'm going," I replied. The driver flashed a look at me in his rear-view mirror, and my co-passengers were a little astonished. We arrived at the address and pulled up in front of a set of huge cast-iron gates. The driver buzzed an intercom, and I told him to announce me. "We have Thomas Dolby for Michael Jackson," he said. After a few moments, the gates swung open. I told the driver he could let me out right there, I'd just walk up the drive. I was too embarrassed to show up with the whole group. The Capital execs looked dubious, but I stepped out of the limo in the glare of its headlights and stumbled up the driveway, dodging puddles. I walked past a big glass guardhouse. Inside I could see a pair of uniformed security guards, their faces lit up by CCTV screens. They motioned me on up the driveway. I waved and caught a glint of semi-automatic weapons on a rack behind them. It was much farther to the house than I had imagined. Michael's home was an imposing mansion with a fountain and a gravel turnaround. The hefty front door was set in a glass surround, and I could see the grand hallway lit up inside. There was a crystal chandelier, marble floors, and twin Busby Berkeley-style curling staircases. I rang the bell pull and stood there dripping in my sodden t-shirt and jeans. I guess I was expecting some sort of butler or domestic servant. But after a few moments, a small figure in a pink silk leisure suit regally descended one side of the staircase and crossed the marble floor. It was him. The door swung open, and I stood there, leaving little puddles in the doorway. Michael greeted me with a smile and pointed me to a small bathroom off the hallway. There was a stack of paper towels on the basin, so I used them to dry my hair as best I could and sop up a little of the rain from my drenched clothes. When I returned, my host was waiting by a gracious seating area at the center of the hallway. "Let's sit," he said, indicating a stuffed leather ottoman. I parked my backside on the ottoman, while he mounted a gigantic, jewel-encrusted medieval throne. It was so massive that he had to clamber up to get into it. His arms barely reached the armrests, as it was clearly designed for someone much larger, Henry VIII, perhaps. Perched on his throne, Michael looked like an action figure of himself. I cast my eyes around the room at a curious array of art treasures. There was a solid gold mantelpiece with a Venetian clock in a glass bell jar, a stuffed raccoon, a Chinese ivory chess set on a Biedermeier games table. Next to that, a Darth Vader helmet on a plinth. Michael settled into the throne in his leisure suit and we began to talk. "You're a Libra, aren't you?" he said. "You were born on October 14th. I saw that article in Cream. I'm only 6 weeks older than you. You're into that stuff," I replied. "I don't really follow horoscopes." I don't see how 1 in every 12 people in the world is going to have the same sort of day as I am. What I love is the symbolism. It's just so symbolic. See, I'm a Virgo. The Virgo symbol looks exactly like my initials, MJ. He picked up a pad of paper and drew it for me. I noticed that his notepad had isolated words and random lines of lyrics jotted on it, like many of my own. Do you have songs and lyrics in your head all the time? I asked. Every day I write a bit, then I go dance a bit, he said. I noticed how brown his eyes were. Then I go play video games. We both laughed. He asked about the groove for She Blinded Me with Science, how I put it together. Were those Simmons electric drums? I dig those. I have a set upstairs. Yes, the SDS5s. But I was triggering them with this weird machine called a PPG wave computer. It was built to control Tangerine Dream's light show. I love those guys. Did you ever hear the soundtrack to Sorcerer? The Roy Scheider film. Brilliant. I've got a copy in my screening room. Oh, and I just got my own Synclav. He was referring to the $120,000 Synclavier computerized sampling keyboard heard on the intro to Beat It. And so our conversation meandered. We talked about music production techniques, the fall colors in New England that he missed here in Los Angeles, how we'd each spent much of our childhoods away from home. I was surprised by the breadth of Michael's knowledge and interests. He was remarkably down to earth and easy to talk to, and as passionate about his music as I was about mine. Thriller had been out a few months, but it had already passed the 5 million sales mark. Michael asked how my album was doing. It's doing well, I told him, not mentioning any figures, but now that I'm on the US charts, the music press back in England are saying I've sold out. You just have to go on believing, Michael said. You have to go on believing that you are better than them, that you're better than everybody. You must never let go of your dream. I was touched by his words, and I felt myself welling up. All evening I'd thought we were alone in the house. But after we'd been chatting for about an hour, what was already a strange evening took an even stranger turn. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed tiny faces peeking out from the railing of the upstairs landing. I glanced up. They vanished. Moments later they were back, more of them this time. I heard hysterical giggling. Then a door swung open, and the 12 inches of Science came blasting out at 120 decibels. Now there were at least a dozen little faces staring at me, and fingers pointing through the spindles of the balustrade. Michael explained that on Thursday evenings he liked to invite the neighbor kids over to play with their radio-controlled toys. I asked, "What's up with the giggling?" He laughed and said, "Oh, they just can't believe you're the guy off the TV." He beckoned to them, and they traipsed down the staircase, each with a toy truck or race car. They were in pajamas and dressing gowns. They laughed and played on the Turkish rug, whizzing model trucks and trains around our feet. Michael directed the proceedings from his perch, like the thin controller in Thomas the Tank Engine. We carried on chatting, but from time to time he broke off mid-sentence to issue a directive. "Hey, Jimmy, bring that over here. Billy, don't do that." Now what did we say about sharing our toys? I never really had a childhood, Michael told me. I spent too much of it on the road. It sounded to me as if his dad and his brothers bullied and teased him because they knew he was by far the most talented. When he asked about my family, I told him I was a happy kid and loved my parents very much, although I had to explain to him what a classical archaeologist was. We discussed our favorite albums and discovered a shared admiration for the Beach Boys' album Surf's Up. Michael was sad that Brian Wilson had severe psychiatric problems and that his brother Dennis was a drunk and a drug addict. "It's better to die a sudden death than just deteriorate. When I die," said Michael, "I want to die like Elvis." As the evening drew on, I felt it was time I made my excuses. I asked Michael if I could call a cab to take me to my hotel over in Hollywood. "Wait," he said, "maybe Randy can give you a ride." He picked up a phone and punched a few buttons. Randy Jackson, his younger brother, must have been hiding out in some other wing of the mansion. "Hi, Funky. Can you drive my friend over to Sunset Strip?" 10 minutes later, Michael's brother Randy appeared in the hall. He was decked out in a skin-tight red leather suit, bare chest, gold necklace, and sunglasses. He said he'd be happy to drop me at my hotel. "You come right home afterwards, Randy, you hear me?" said Michael emphatically. "I don't want you going to some club, picking up a fish, smoking those turds you smoke." As Randy Jackson gunned his Jeep up through the Hollywood Hills, the rain was still lashing down. Laurel Canyon, with its sharp bends and high concrete verges, was like a whitewater rapid. K-Rock was blaring on the radio. I gripped the armrests and longed for my bed. Randy had a glint in his eye. "Hey, Dolby, you wanna come check out Club Odyssey with me? They have a great sound system, and the best babes in Hollywood hang out there. I took a deep breath. I think I'll pass this time, I said. I'm English. The only new songs I'd worked on were the ones I'd done for Michael Jackson. I had managed to get the tapes over to him the day before I flew back to England, and I waited to hear whether he liked them. Weeks went by and there was no response. Finally, I called his number. It had been switched to an answering service. I left a message and one of his assistants contacted me to schedule a call, at 3 a.m. London time. How did you like my songs? I asked. There was a pause. I guess I kinda liked the drum parts. I was disappointed. Only the drum parts. Well, can I send you anything else? Another pause. Are you near Wales? The giant fish, or the country? The country. Could you get me some ragwort for my llamas? Welsh ragwort is Louis's favorite. I laughed, but he wasn't joking. That was the last time I ever talked to Michael on the phone. Kathleen's housemate and childhood friend was Mary Coller. She was looking for a job. Her previous position, by complete coincidence, was as personal assistant to Michael Jackson. For 3 years she went every day to his Havenhurst estate and organized his life, picking out birthday presents for Elizabeth Taylor, inviting the Astairs over for dinner, or rounding up Bubbles the chimp when he escaped into the Encino undergrowth. Mary had a pager and was on call 24 hours a day. Michael would beep her at 2 a.m. just to ask where the popcorn was kept. She devoted her life to him. Then, suddenly, for no apparent reason, she was given a fortnight's wages and shown the door. She hadn't messed up or offended anyone. Try as she might, she could not get Michael on the phone. By this stage of his career he was insulated by layers of security staff, aides, and family retainers. Mary was devastated. Kathleen comforted her, but of course there was nothing I could do to intervene. What I was able to do was offer her a job, and she started working for my management team under Andy Ferguson. Michael Jackson concluded the Bad World Tour with a series of 5 concerts at the Los Angeles Sports Arena. Now at the peak of his fame, Michael had smashed all the record books. He had also become a global curiosity, yet his quirky habits and strange lifestyle choices, intriguing to some and revolting to others, did nothing to take away from his commercial appeal. With his Bad album topping the charts, the LA dates were sold out within hours of going on sale. On the last night of the tour, all of Hollywood turned out to see him. He had sent personal messages to every A-list celebrity, inviting them backstage for a reception before the show. His office sent Mary Coller 4 complimentary tickets, and she brought Kathleen and me, along with my bass player and lodger Terry Jackson. Under the bleachers in the huge concrete backstage area of the arena, the scene was chaotic. Michael's people had set up a large Bedouin tent surrounded by exotic Persian rugs. Wolfgang Puck was doing the catering, but there were dozens more VIPs than he'd anticipated. By the time we arrived, glasses were dry and the hors d'oeuvres were long gone. No paparazzi were allowed backstage, but there was a professional camera set up inside the tent, as Michael's desire was to create the photo album to end all photo albums, featuring himself posing with the top names in show business. With less than an hour until Michael was due on stage, time was running short. The staff began to herd the celebs towards the tent in a long unruly line that was moving very slowly. This did not go over too well. Lou, the Hulk, Ferrigno stepped on Danny DeVito's toe. Paula Abdul was getting antsy, and Arnold Schwarzenegger started complaining loudly to one of Michael's staff, who was talking helplessly into his headset microphone. Michael's trusted family retainer Bill usually ran things in this situation, but he seemed to be absent. Ahead of us in the line, I heard Joan Rivers's whiny voice call out, "This sucks, Michael." Without missing a beat, Mary Coller stepped up to the front of the line and started directing traffic. Most of Michael's staff knew her as his assistant and must have assumed she was still on his payroll. Mary waved her arms and issued orders this way and that, reassuring the listless celebs that their turn with Michael would arrive very soon. You could see the flashes popping inside the tent. Once Mary took charge, the line began to thin out, and our foursome were the last to step inside to Michael's inner sanctum. The tent interior was brightly lit and lavishly decorated, like a Rudolph Valentino movie set. Michael greeted me warmly, and I introduced Kathleen and Terry. He briefly clutched Mary's hand, then turned directly to the photographer and struck a rigid camera pose, smiling from ear to ear. The photographer motioned for the guests to huddle close to Michael and compose the shot. Much to my surprise, out of the corner of my eye I saw Kathleen lean in to whisper something in his ear. As he took in Kathleen's words, his face slowly crumbled. By the time she had finished, he looked utterly miserable. Then he turned to her and said, "Well, maybe Bill could do that." And with that his smile returned, the photographer snapped a couple of shots, and our audience with the king of pop was over. Outside, I asked Kathleen what on earth she had said. I told him, You should be ashamed of yourself. Mary was devoted to you. You really need to apologize to her, because you broke her heart. I instantly wrapped my arms around my wife and told her I loved her. This was certainly the only real thing anyone had said to him all evening. But he never did apologize, and it's only because of Mary's complete loyalty to Michael and the Jackson legacy that she has never to this day spilled the beans about her 3 years working as his personal assistant.